Where did the Bard even come from? It feels like everyone's favorite loot-playing, vicious mocking, rampant seducing character class has always been a part of not only Dungeons & Dragons, but fantasy role-playing games since the beginning. But one look at the original Dungeons & Dragons rulebook released in 1974 reveals that this wasn't the case. So like, when did the Bard even make its role-playing debut, and how did Gary Gygax even come up with the idea of a battle minstrel in the first place? Well, first, we need to go back in time to 1977 with the release of the first edition of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. This was the first time the Bard had ever been mentioned in the role-playing game, and you couldn't be one from the get-go. In fact, it was a complete fucking nightmare for any would-be combat troubadour because the path of the Bard was absolutely ridiculous. If you wanted to be a Bard, first you'd have to make a human or a half-elf fighter and get it to level 5. Then, you have to multi-class into Thief and then get that to level 5. The last step on the Bard's path was you had to take Druidic training. Now, I have no idea what this means because I have never played Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1E, but it sounds kind of like a pain in the ass. Had to give Beyonce water. Now, the payoff for this incredibly long training arc is that AD&D bards got access to Bardic Charm, which lets them shamelessly charm any foe they come across. They also had access to druid spells, and they could successfully identify any magic items using their bardic lore ability. It would take 12 years before Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition introduced the bard as a class that you could play from the get-go. This version of the bard was much more in line with what we think of the class as today. Rather than being a druid, fighter, thief hybrid, the bard in AD&D 2E was made an optional subclass of the rogue. And just like the bards of today, AD&D 2E bards were able to use thief skills, cast a limited selection of wizard spells, and they were proficient in most weapons that the fighter could use. All the while, they were expected to be the obnoxious face of the party. Now, I could go on about how the bard has evolved and changed in the minutiae in D&D over the next 33 years, but honestly, it would just be minor mechanical changes, and quite frankly, I don't really give a shit. What really piqued my interest was, where did Gary even come up with the idea to have a magic-wielding, roguish jongleur? Gotta thank the thesaurus for that one. To find that out, we need to go back in time 1900 years. Now, anyone who's had a half-decent education knows that storytelling and performance have been staples of humankind since the invention of language. That made me feel so smart. But the first time we see the word bard in history is from the Roman poet Lucan, who called them the poets and minstrels of Gaul and Britain. Now, that quote isn't necessarily super correct because neither Gaul nor Britain were really nationalized in the 1st century AD, but I will let that slide, Encyclopedia Britannica. Anyway, a bard's job in ancient Celtic society was twofold. First, they had to come up with and perform various songs talking about the achievements of various chiefs and warriors in their tribe. In other words, they were kind of like a one-man PR firm. Second, and arguably more important, they were the historians and kind of the lawyers of their particular tribe. See, these pre-Christian Celtic folk didn't exactly have the concept of writing nailed down yet.
So you're asking me if I'm illiterate?
And so the only way that people could really learn about their history or learn about the laws of the land was through oral tradition. And these Bardy boys committed all of that down to memory. Now, bards didn't really make it that far into modernity in Gaul or England. Can't imagine why. But bardic traditions did persist in Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, where they evolved ever so slightly from the classical era to the medieval era. As writing became kind of more and more commonplace in the British Isles, the bards' roles as historians and sort of lawyers diminished a lot. Instead, they really leaned into their roles as one-man PR firms. Local Scottish, Irish, and Welsh lords would pay bards to compose various songs and poems about their family's great deeds. And if that lord quite literally failed to pay the piper, the bard would then go and write a bunch of songs making fun of them. Now, what I find absolutely mental is that these ancient bardic traditions lasted until the 17th century in Ireland and the 18th century in Scotland. And you might be wondering what killed these millennia-old traditions? 2 words, baby. English colonialism. Let's go. It's not that funny. It's pretty sad, actually. Now, one final caveat. In the evolution of fantasy role-playing games, Michael Tresca says that the modern bard is a collection of the Celtic bard that we just talked about, the Norse skald, and the Southern European minstrel. In the afternoon that I spent in the library researching and writing this video, I found that the skald and minstrel's roles were pretty much identical to that of the Celtic bard. Now, if my afternoon of research is actually wrong and you in fact know better, feel free to let me know in the comments, and until then, I'll see you next time. No, it's thanks for watching. Fuck, why is this the hardest part?